This is all completely false. And a big reason for this confusion is that many people simply do not understand the difference between the average and the median. Like I said, there's a lot of wealth in the US, but that wealth is concentrated in a few hands. The US has one of the highest rates of wealth inequality in the entire world. So I made an infographic illustrating the difference between average wealth and median wealth. Because the average wealth in the US looks very high because there are a small handful of very rich oligarchs. However, let's think about it this way. If you have a room with 10 people and each person in the room has $1,000 of wealth, the average wealth is $1,000 per person, and the median wealth is $1,000. The median is the middle value. However, if you have the same room with 10 people, but one of those people is a billionaire and the 9 other people only have $1,000 of wealth, suddenly the average wealth shoots up to $100 million per person. But that doesn't mean that the other 9 people are somehow rich. They don't have $100 million of wealth. One person has $1 billion of wealth. The other people are still poor. They only have $1,000 of wealth. This is why it's more important to look at median wealth. The median wealth is still 1,000. It's not 100 million. That single billionaire massively skews the data. All of this data is from the Global Wealth Report published every year by UBS, the major Swiss bank. Now, in this report, UBS calculated the wealth per adult in the 30 richest economies in the world. And it is true that if you look at average wealth per adult, the US is in second place after Switzerland. However, right next to that data in the report is something that the Wall Street Journal overlooked, which is median wealth per adult. If you look at median wealth, suddenly the US goes from being in second place way down to 28th place. Median wealth per adult in the US is lower than the median wealth in Austria and Portugal and Slovenia and Israel and Sweden and Finland and Qatar and Singapore and Ireland and South Korea. Americans are not wealthy. If you think Americans are wealthy, you have to say Austrians are wealthy, Portuguese are wealthy, Slovenians are wealthy, because the median person in those countries has more wealth than the median American. In reality, the US is such an unequal country with a small handful of extremely wealthy billionaires that it makes the average American look wealthy.
When I told you that immigration, ICE, prisons weren't just for immigrants about 2 years ago, nobody really understood what I meant by that. When I seen that the GEO was trying to make it legal for them to keep people for really no reason and just delay their immigration hearings and have what they call no habeas corpus, I knew that they weren't planning on sending anyone back to their countries. Not the majority of them anyway. I knew that we were going to in some way, form or fashion, make them into basically slaves to work for $1 a day. You can check that fact. If you understand the way that the petrodollar works and you understand what America has been trying to do because of the, outrageous debt that we're in, we first had to have a way to stomp out the political uprising that they knew was coming, because they knew they were going to have to, invade Venezuela, get rid of Maduro in order to have a backbone for the new way of oil that we would basically want to take over their earnings. And we've done that. They put Marco Rubio in charge of that facilitation of how the oil gets sold, where it goes, and so on and so forth.
Right. So it's been reported that the oil sold for $500 million, that $300 million went to Venezuelan government. What happened to the other $200 million?
It's still sitting in the account, is my understanding at this time.
The account in Qatar?
Well, the account, yes, but that will ultimately be that's a short-term account. Ultimately, it will be a U.S. Treasury blocked account in the United States.
And will it also be audited?
Correct. Well, the audit will be on the expenditures. At the front end, we'll tell them this is what the money can be spent on. Again, I'm not talking about all the other revenues the Venezuelan government may have. We're talking about the revenues from the sanctioned oil. At the front end, we will say this is what the allowable expenses are. And then they will agree to fund, as part of the overall cost, they will pay for and fund an audit system acceptable to us to ensure that that's how the money was spent.
And
Also, we needed to hurt China because China was making a lot of progress. Venezuela was securing deals with them. Then, as that was going on, the big beautiful bill had to be able to fund for all the uprising that would come from Americans. And that's why I said it wasn't just for immigration. So now you have to change the rules of engagement, which is to, for example, the first thing they did was went from narco traffickers to narco terrorists, which allowed them, under their laws, American laws, to be able to blow anybody up because they considered an invasion, like war. And that's why you have the bombings off the coast of Venezuela, fishing boats, narco boats, whatever you have it. But I said, if they can do that with them and just change that, then they can do that with us, American citizens, and just change the way we charge people and make us into terrorists. And as you see, that's exactly what Marco Rubio is doing.
The President signed National Security Presidential Memorandum Number 7, outlining a comprehensive strategy to investigate and disrupt Antifa terror networks and their allies. Last November, the State Department designated 4 violent, far-left extremist groups as foreign terrorist organizations, and there will be more designations soon.
The laws distinguish, however, international terrorism from domestic terrorism and give investigators greater access to investigative tools and allow investigators to target not just terrorists, not just people who are committing crimes or assisting those committing crimes or committing violent acts, but to attack people 2 or 3 degrees separated. And that's what I think this meeting is about, because it's focusing on the designation of left-wing groups as foreign terrorist groups.
So the second wave was to hurt Russia, because that is another country that provides oil to China. And the whole purpose, like I said, it's about making money. It's about the debt. We're trying to force China into doing more deals with America in order that we can find a new source revenue. We get oil from Canada, but we know that relationship was on shaky ground from when Trump said that he was going to try to take over the entire Western Hemisphere from, Iceland all the way down to Brazil. So he had to have something to fall back on because he knew he was going to invade in Iran, and we had to stop money from going to Russia by any means necessary. So we've been going back and forth with the tariff deal with China. Then there's the AI situation. We don't want China to catch up with, the chips and SpaceX and all that kind of stuff, which they've thoroughly copied and make very good progress on that. So DeepSeek and all them are now infiltrating into the American economy by way of making things cheaper in China, which we used to expound on that. But since the tariff wars, we can't do that no longer. So it's basically going to all the BRICS nations now.
I think China is beginning to engage in what I'll call AI dumping. And that is they're going to have a series of open weight models. About a third of corporations now are supposedly using Chinese lightweight open weight models that are cheaper. If I were Xi, I would just dump cheap AI into the US market. And the moment large corporations start announcing they're not engaging these multi-million-dollar site licenses with Anthropic or OpenAI, they're using these inexpensive Chinese models, and the market realizes that there's no way they can justify these incredible valuations, I think the US market crashes, because 40% of the S&P now is directly or tangentially related to this giant bet America is making on AI. The majority of GDP growth over the last 2 years has come from AI capex. If that slows down, we're immediately in recession.
So the economy is in a wreck on all fronts: energy, petrodollar, Medicaid, Medicare, all of it is in the gutter right now. Jobs, everything.
Let's start with the problem, because this is where almost every other explanation online gets it wrong. For the last 3 years, a small handful of companies have been carrying almost the entire stock market on their backs. Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, and Oracle. You already know their names. What you might not know is exactly how much money they are burning right now just to stay in the AI race, and how fast that number is climbing. In 2026, the combined number is expected to hit roughly $725 billion. Read that again, $725 billion in a single year from just 4 of these companies. And that is not even counting Oracle, which is spending aggressively as well. Break it down company by company, and it gets even more intense. Amazon alone is spending close to $200 billion this year, more than any other single company. Microsoft is right behind it at around $190 billion. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, is spending somewhere between $175 and $185 billion. Meta, which does not even have a public cloud business to sell this extra computing power to, raised its own spending guidance to as much as $145 billion, blaming higher memory chip prices and new data center construction that keeps expanding. To put that in perspective, some analysts at Goldman Sachs now expect these same 4 companies to spend a combined $5.3 trillion on capital expenditure between 2025 and 2030. That is more money than the entire yearly economic output of most countries on Earth spent by 4 companies on servers, chips, and buildings. Spending this much money would be perfectly fine if the cash was coming in just as fast as it is going out. But it is not. According to research from Epoch AI, which tracked the real financial filings of these 5 companies going back to the release of GPT-4 operating cash flow, meaning the actual money coming in from running their businesses day to day, is growing at about 23% per year. Meanwhile, their capital spending on AI infrastructure is growing at about 70% per year. Those 2 lines are moving in completely different directions, and mathematically, they are about to cross.
The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000. And the NASDAQ smashing records. Americans' 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about.
Now, when she says we, she only means the rich investors, the 1%.
So watch this. This pyramid right here represents all 132 million American households. Those 12 black cups, that's America's wealthiest 10%. The yellow cups, that's everyone else, approximately 300 million Americans. Now take a look at this pyramid. According to the Federal Reserve, Americans own about $55 trillion worth of stocks. This pyramid right here represents that wealth. And here's what we're told over and over again. The market is setting records. The economy is booming. But GDP does not pay your rent, and the Dow does not buy your groceries. Those 12 black cups own 104 of the investment cups. The other 108, they share what's left. When the market rises, these 12 cups receive most of the gain. Pause and take a really good look at it. You can see why record stock markets don't automatically translate to the life of most American households.
So when that didn't work, after the embargo on Cuba, then the final plan was to take over the Strait of Hormuz and cut China off from that way, because Iran sells them oil and energy also. And we see how that's turned out.
This year, China is expected to contribute 26.6% of the world's total GDP growth. That will mean that China's contribution to the world's growth will be more than all of the G7 countries put together. Therefore, if China is tweaking its model to rely less on exports to the world and more on boosting consumer spending of Chinese citizens inside China, then that will have big implications for, well, companies that sell in China and also for all countries around the world that import Chinese stuff.
The problem that wasn't, really factored is how bad it would hurt the entire world. Oil in the world where he suspected that everybody would come to America and we would ease up the tariffs on those countries if they would buy oil from us has not worked. So we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. But the way to hold on to everything that's been started is to change the rules of engagement. And in order to do that, we need to get rid of the International Criminal Court, which has very, very loudly been coming out saying, yeah, I think we're going to charge the American president with war criminal crimes, just like we did, with Iran, just like we did with Israel, genocide crimes. So now Marco Rubio and them expected that. He has not been a fan of the International Criminal Court anyway. Donald Trump has a long-standing, war with them. So now we're to the point where we figure we got to get other countries with us for this new rules of engagement. And that's the reason why you see Scott Bassett, Stephen Miller, and Marco Rubio for the political terrorist program trying to change the rules on who they can charge with terrorism for domestic people, foreign and abroad. And they do that by making all people with an international intelligence backing of like Israel and other countries. We do this all the time. We did it during apartheid time. We have to be able to convince the world that this is the new way forward in order to keep the firm grip on the things we've already started. Because President Trump doesn't want an uprising here in America, and he wants to make it seem like everybody's being funded by China, Russia, our adversaries, in order to be able to charge them with terrorism, which is why you've seen Kevin O'Leary talking about these two young girls in Utah get funding from China. What? And you see how that worked out.
Their platforms. Who is it? So these are proxies for the...
Sitting with this for a moment, we decided to take it as a compliment because, first of all, how are these men scared of us? Have you met us? Hi. What are we talking about?
I want a forensic audit of who's funding their platforms. Who is it? So these are proxies for the Chinese government's my argument. And if they're not, because I want them to be able to defend their name to Gabby, come out wherever you are.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead. Mr. Wonderful's Nancy Drew little detective agency, have at it, brother, because if we were Chinese operatives, we would be the worst operatives in the entire world. Someone alert Beijing that the payment portal to Jackie and I's Amex bills is somehow broken. As a reminder, we run Democratic campaigns in the state of Utah. If we were in this to be making money, we would be doing literally anything else. And you should know that because your job is to give small business owners advice. It's so unserious.
And they should thank me for this promotion I'm giving them right now. And let's shine the light of transparency on what you're doing, because they're also going after the leadership in Utah itself. These two cells.
Well, Kevin, you say that like it's a scandal, and it's not, because we are damn proud of the fact that we will continue to be shining a light on the corruption and insanity that is going on in this state, not just with this project, but with many others. We will continue to be here doing that work long after you've forgotten about Utah, because you don't actually care about what happens to the state.
Let's show the people of Utah you actually care about them.
We don't need Kevin to teach us to care about Utah, because we've been here, we were born here, we work here, we have sacrificed a lot of time, unpaid jobs, just to try and make this state better. We're the ones that actually love this state, and that is why we care about its future, and we care about this data center and what it could do to the future of our state.
Kevin O'Leary appeared as a guest on this program back on May 11th and discussed the ongoing controversy surrounding his planned data center project in Utah. Now, he made certain claims relating to the opponents of that project. Mr. O'Leary has now corrected the record and explained that he has no evidence that the Alliance for a Better Utah, Elevate Strategies, Josh Cantor, Taylor Knuth, or Gabrielle Finlayson are funded by China or the Chinese Communist Party. Fox News Media is likely likewise aware of no evidence that they are funded by or acting at the direction of or in coordination with Chinese interests in opposing Kevin O'Leary's project. Fox News Media apologizes for the error.
Now, like I said, this is the plan. In order to stop political uprising, people are going to be charged with foreign intelligence as saying they're getting some type of funding from foreign adversaries to be able to charge them with international terrorism. You make them a foreign asset. And that is what's happening, folks. So we're losing our rights behind a made-up version of terrorism for you, Americans, to be charged, as you've seen what happened with the people in Texas. They got over 100 and something years, you know what I mean, for the act of protesting against ICE.
Domestic terrorism. That doesn't mean that domestic terrorism can't be used as the predicate for the FBI to go and open up investigations into these groups that they might not be able to open up otherwise. And we saw a great example of that in the sentences that were handed down to the anti-ICE protesters in Texas recently, in Prairieville, Texas. If you look at the sentences, they were extraordinary. It was almost, I'm not exaggerating, half a millennium of federal years in federal prison, including 30 years for somebody who wasn't even present at the thing for moving left-wing literature around, which they alleged to be obstruction of justice. So this is very real.
They want to make this the norm. If they deem you a political terrorist, then they'll be able to use more aggressive tactics. In other words, kill you on sight, as you see ICE has no problem doing. So these are the things that I've been trying to warn people about, because this is the same MO we've always used. Just like with the British intelligence during the apartheid. Let me show you what I mean.
Marco Rubio, like the Bond villain that he is, just rounded up 60 countries to stop far-left terrorism. The Bond Villain Summit comes off the back of arresting one of the world's leading pro-Palestine philanthropists in Spain. Fergie Chambers now faces extradition to the United States for the crime of opposing genocide. The US and Israel wants a world where no one can protest against the crimes they commit. A world where children can be slaughtered and no one is allowed to fight back. Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, the rector of the University of Glasgow, has called Fergie Chambers' funding vital for the care of wounded children in Gaza. But to the US and Spanish states operating in perfect cross-border harmony, Chambers is a transnational financial threat. If you disrupt genocide, you are a terrorist.
That a few people get wealthy, and if you said platitudes that were obviously stupid, you could...
You're getting wealthy off of killing Palestinians, with Palantir kills Palestinians with their AI and technology.
Oh.
You're killing my family in Palestine.
Yeah. And, you know...
How do you sleep at night?
Well, if you...
Shame on you.
Do you want to hear my answer?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So, I think the primary cause of death to Palestinians... Okay, do you want to hear the answer, or do you want to yell? Well, you don't want to hear an answer? Obviously. So the primary source of death in Palestine is the fact that Hamas has realized that there are millions and millions of useful idiots that will...
This is why you don't get left to speak. Because you are killing my people and you're justifying it because of Hamas or anyone else.
Can we get security up there?
Your AI and your technology from Palantir kills Palestinians.
Mostly terrorists, that's true.
No.
The large language models, the Anthropics and the AIs, which are about to go public, can replicate what you're doing.
Most of the things they talk about in public are running on Palantir. We're in the business of giving you the ability to solve those problems for yourself and own the means of production. I don't think in win-lose. I think in domination.
There's a company that's growing like crazy, but its stock is falling apart. In the first 3 months of 2026, its revenue grew 85%. That's what you might expect over a few years, but this happened in a single year. Its American business more than doubled in the same stretch, and when management looked at the numbers, they did the thing that companies almost never do in the middle of a year. They raised their own forecast, and they raised it hard. The stock fell off a cliff. By late June 2026, shares had shed roughly a third of their value since January, and the company touched its lowest price in more than a year.
So we've already seen that Israel and America are trying to get together this new form, which is really the old form of intelligence.
Time we created something big, it was destroyed, burned down. Like where? Wilmington, North Carolina, Eatonville, Rosewood, Tulsa, Philadelphia, Chester, Pennsylvania, Wilmington, North Carolina, Blackwood, South Carolina, in Jersey. Yeah. Anytime we had any infrastructure, two things happened. You know what Central Park is, right? No, it's not. Central Park was actually a place called Seneca Village. It was when free black people decided to converge in one area, and they decided to redistrict that area, even though they owned the land and the houses that they built free and clear, and they destroyed those people, displaced those people, and built a park around it. There's a place called Lake Lanier. It used to be a thriving black town. They decided to the black folks, get rid of the ones they couldn't, and then people right now are voting on it every weekend. That's what happened to us. That's what got destroyed.
The whole thing is to brainwash other nations into thinking this is needed. And we do that by pressure. We do that by forcing them through tariffs and through sanctions and things like that to comply. Give us intelligence, make us make the connections where we can make all our enemies seem like foreign terrorists. And we need intelligence to do that. So you have the merger of the militaries of Israel, all of their adversaries, and then America, all of our adversaries that we bullied, which we're trying to believe right now into saying this is going to be the new norm. We can make whoever we want our enemies, foreign and domestic.
They're aligned groups. Secretary of State Rubio talked about targeting anti-fascist organizations.
Trump's war with Iran has created global chaos. People are dying and gas prices are through the roof. But while you are paying more, let's talk about who is profiting off of this war. Start with the weapons makers. No surprises here. Lockheed Martin stock is up about 25% since the start of the year. RTX, which is the company formerly known as Raytheon, is up over 10%. During the Cold War, there were as many as 51 companies that the Pentagon could buy weapons from. But today, because of corporate consolidation, there are just 5 major contractors left. So you have the same taxpayer money, but much bigger invoices.
So PowerUs is one of the dozens of drone companies competing for Pentagon contracts right now, except that this one is partially owned by both Don Jr. and Eric Trump. The Associated Press is reporting that PowerUs is flushed with cash and just ballooning in size as it buys up its rivals. And it's hoping to win some of the $1.1 billion set aside by the Pentagon to basically build a manufacturing base for armed drones since the Trump administration banned importing drones from China. The company makes drones mostly for commercial use, like spreading fertilizer, putting out forest fires, but it's growing fast to supply the Defense Department with armed drones, like the ones used in the Russia-Ukraine war and most recently by Iran. PowerUs actually bought 3 rivals in the past 6 months and plans to buy more, and the AP is reporting that it's raised $60 million from investors to fund this buying spree. Of course, this is getting some criticism. A government ethics expert told the AP that this is straight up corruption because government decision makers will obviously feel pressure to award contracts to enrich the president's family.
Then there's oil. Gasoline prices just had their highest monthly increase on record. That's a disaster, obviously, for consumers who are paying $4 a gallon at the pump. But oil companies, at least American oil companies, whose supplies were not disrupted at the Strait of Hormuz, they are enjoying a very pretty windfall because they can sell the same oil at higher prices. Trump himself put it plainly on Truth Social, saying, when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money. We, as in someone else, not you, obviously. And then there are prediction markets. On platforms like Polymarket, anonymous traders have made fortunes on perfectly timed war bets.
Mr. Chairman, are you aware that President Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., has been hired as an advisor for both Kalshi and Polymarket, two competing companies?
Congressman, I'm aware of this.
And would you say that it's accurate then that the Trump family has a financial stake in how these prediction markets are regulated?
Congressman, I believe this hypothetical that you're trying to engage in is a political exercise.
I don't know how this is hypothetical. The president's son is, involved with both of these companies. I mean, he makes a lot of money for it, but of course they have a financial interest in all of this. So it seems to me like the only reason two competing companies hired the same person is because they think he must be really, really, really valuable. I mean, and I wonder why they would think that, right? I mean, but Mr. Selig, has anybody in the White House ever asked or insinuated that you should drop the CFTC's probe into Polymarket?
Congressman, we treat all market participants alike. We do not pick winners and losers or engage in favoritism or bring politics into any of these matters. We take them very seriously, and I think it's insulting that you're insinuating that we would play
I'm worried because
games.
it smells like corruption. I'll be honest with you.
One account, username MAGA My Man, made $553,000 betting that Iran's supreme leader would be killed, or out of office. That was the bet. The bet was placed just before it happened, and at least 50 brand new accounts coincidentally placed bets on a ceasefire minutes before Trump announced it on social media. Similarly, a mere 15 minutes before Trump posted market-moving information about talks with Iran, someone out there placed bets worth $500 million on oil prices going down, which they did, briefly, right after Trump coincidentally made that announcement. And look, someone was on the other side of those bets and trades, someone who didn't know, who didn't have inside information, and lost out. But hey, wars are expensive.
Americans are not wealthy. Today I'm going to be looking at a broad set of data and many different indicators that show how Americans are not wealthy compared to people in other advanced economies. But the Western media constantly spreads a pernicious narrative that supposedly the United Kingdom is poorer than Mississippi, which is the poorest U.S. state. This is completely ridiculous, as I'll show today. This misleading narrative is especially common on the American right. Trump supporters, MAGA, they refer to Europeans disparagingly as so-called Euro-poors. And even some European media outlets have published articles claiming that American families are so much richer than us. This is all completely false. And a big reason for this confusion is that many people simply do not understand the difference between the average and the median. Like I said, there's a lot of wealth in the US, but that wealth is concentrated in a few hands. The US has one of the highest rates of wealth inequality in the entire world. So I made an infographic illustrating the difference between average wealth and median wealth. Because the average wealth in the US looks very high because there are a small handful of very rich oligarchs. However, let's think about it this way. If you have a room with 10 people and each person in the room has $1,000 of wealth, the average wealth is $1,000 per person, and the median wealth is $1,000. The median is the middle value. However, if you have the same room with 10 people, but one of those people is a billionaire and the 9 other people only have $1,000 of wealth, suddenly the average wealth shoots up to $100 million per person. But that doesn't mean that the other 9 people are somehow rich. They don't have $100 million of wealth. One person has $1 billion of wealth. The other people are still poor. They only have $1,000 of wealth. This is why it's more important to look at median wealth. The median wealth is still 1,000. It's not 100 million. That single billionaire massively skews the data. This is such a crucial difference, and yet many people simply don't understand it. And it's not just Trump supporters in MAGA who don't understand this. Even mainstream media outlets like the Wall Street Journal keep publishing articles claiming that Europeans are lagging behind Americans in wealth. The Wall Street Journal published this article in June looking at the UBS Global Wealth Report, and they boasted that the average wealth in the United States is much higher than the average wealth in many European countries. However, I'm going to look at this exact same report and show how that article in the Wall Street Journal is extremely misleading and how the journalist ignored the median data and only looked at the average data. All of this data is from the Global Wealth Report published every year by UBS, the major Swiss bank. Now, in this report, UBS calculated the wealth per adult in the 30 richest economies in the world. And it is true that if you look at average wealth per adult, the US is in second place after Switzerland. However, right next to that data in the report is something that the Wall Street Journal overlooked, which is median wealth per adult. If you look at median wealth, suddenly the US goes from being in second place way down to 28th place. Median wealth per adult in the US is lower than the median wealth in Austria and Portugal and Slovenia and Israel and Sweden and Finland and Qatar and Singapore and Ireland and South Korea. Americans are not wealthy. If you think Americans are wealthy, you have to say Austrians are wealthy, Portuguese are wealthy, Slovenians are wealthy, because the median person in those countries has more wealth than the median American. In reality, the US is such an unequal country with a small handful of extremely wealthy billionaires that it makes the average American look wealthy. But that average is extremely skewed by the rich, just like I illustrated in this infographic, where adding a billionaire into a room with 9 people with $1,000 makes the average wealth over $100 million. But obviously, no one in their right mind would claim that the other 9 people are suddenly centimillionaires. They're not. This is why the claim that Britain is poorer than Mississippi is utterly false. It is based on a complete misunderstanding of the difference between average and median, and it's also based on a misunderstanding of the difference between median wealth and GDP per capita. GDP is not a measurement of wealth. GDP is a measurement of output, of the economic output, of the value of all of the goods and services produced in a country in 1 year, not wealth. Despite the many economic problems in the United Kingdom, the median wealth per adult in the UK is $125,000 US. The US is half of that at $69,000 US. Moreover, conservative Americans, especially Trump supporters, love to make fun of Canada. They say that Canada is supposedly the 51st state and they want to annex Canada. And they often make fun of Canadians for supposedly being poorer than Americans. Once again, that's based on a completely ignorant misunderstanding of the difference between average and median. The median wealth per adult in Canada is $148,000 US, more than double the median in the US of $69,000 US. Now, the same report from the Swiss bank UBS also looked at wealth inequality in dozens of major economies. And they measured this wealth inequality with the Gini coefficient. A Gini coefficient of 1 means that all of the wealth in the country is held by one person. A Gini coefficient of 0 means that all of the wealth is equally held by everyone in the country. Perfect equality. So the higher the Gini coefficient is, the closer to 1 it is, the more inequality. And vice versa. The lower that the Gini coefficient is, the closer that it is to 0, the lower the inequality is. This shows that the US is one of the most unequal countries on earth in terms of wealth inequality. The US is the 6th most unequal country at roughly the same level as Saudi Arabia, which is an absolute monarchy run by a royal family that controls so much of the wealth of the country. I mean, this is the perfect example of how the US oligarchic system, with a small handful of billionaires and now a trillionaire, the level of inequality is similar to a literal absolute monarchy. That's how extreme it is. Moreover, The US is almost as unequal as Brazil or South Africa, a country that had an apartheid regime for decades. South Africa is the third most unequal country on earth. Russia is the second most unequal. Russia is also, again, a case study of a country that after the overthrow of the Soviet Union in 1991, you had neoliberal capitalist shock therapy, mass privatization. A small handful of rich oligarchs bought up so much of the formerly nationalized industries that had been public property. Many of those industries and state assets were sold in these corrupt fire sales to a small handful of oligarchs. And yet the inequality in the US is getting close to the level of the inequality in Russia. And then the most unequal country on earth is another absolute monarchy, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE.